The hedge in front of you is not a hedge. It is a wall. 6 feet of compressed earth. Roots older than your grandfather. Brambles so dense that a bullet won't always pass through it cleanly. And somewhere on the other side, 10 feet away, maybe less, a German MG-42 is waiting for you to move. You can hear it. The gun crew shifting. A boot scraping dirt. One of them coughs. Your sergeant grabs your collar and pulls his mouth to your ear. His voice is barely breath. When I say go, you go. Don't think. Don't stop. Don't look back. It is July 11th, 1944. You are in Normandy, France. The place is called Saint-Lô. And for the last 34 days, you have been trying to cross fields that were never supposed to be this hard to cross. You thought the beach was the worst of it. You were wrong. 6 weeks ago you didn't know what a hedgerow was. You were Private First Class, 29th Infantry Division, 116th Regiment. The same unit that bled on Omaha Beach on June 6, 1944. You came ashore in the second wave. The water was pink. The sand was a graveyard. Men from your company died before their boots even touched dry ground. But you made it up the bluff. And everyone told you, once you're past the beach it gets easier. The interior of France is open farmland. Rolling fields. Room to maneuver. The Germans would fall back. The war would move fast. What no one told you, what no Allied commander had fully prepared for, was the bocage. The hedgerows of Normandy. The French had been building them for over 1,000 years. Every farm, every field, every small piece of Norman land was bordered by these earthen embankments, packed solid with the roots of oak, hawthorn, and elm, and topped with hedges so thick they blocked all visibility. Some walls stood 8 feet tall. The fields between them were rarely wider than a football field. Often less. From the air, the bocage looked like a green patchwork quilt. On the ground, it was a maze of perfect killing grounds. Every hedgerow was a fortification. Every gap was a kill zone. Every sunken lane, and there were thousands of them, was an ambush corridor. Field Marshal Erwin Rommel had studied this terrain personally. He ordered his men to dig into every hedgerow, to wire them, to booby-trap them, to turn 1,000 years of French farmland into an interconnected fortress. By the time you climbed off Omaha Beach alive, the Wehrmacht was already waiting inside those green walls. Your objective was the city of Saint-Lô, a critical road junction that controlled all movement through western Normandy. Without it, the entire Allied breakout from the beachhead was impossible. Eisenhower needed that city. Bradley needed that city. And to get it, someone had to go through the hedgerows. The first week after D-Day, your regiment advanced less than a mile a day. Not because of cowardice, every man around you was fighting with everything he had. But each hedgerow crossing was its own separate battle. You would clear one field, lose 3 men doing it, cross into the next field, and find another hedgerow exactly like the last one. Waiting. Defended. Patient. The Germans called it Heckenkrieg. Hedge war. By late June, casualty rates in the bocage were approaching those of the First World War. The 29th Division had already lost over 2,000 men. Replacements arrived and died within days, sometimes hours, before anyone learned their names. And still Saint-Lô hadn't fallen. It is now 0430 hours. Still dark. You move in single file along a sunken lane, worn 6 feet below field level by centuries of cart traffic. The hedges close above you like a tunnel. You can see maybe 5 yards ahead. Your M1 Garand is loaded, safety off, and your hand is sweating against the wooden stock even though the temperature is barely 60 degrees. The man ahead of you is Private Eddie Bowen from Ohio, 19 years old. He has a younger sister named Ruth, and a photograph of her tucked inside his helmet liner. You know this because he told you 3 nights ago, when neither of you could sleep and the artillery was walking its way across the field to your left and you both needed to talk about something, anything that wasn't the sound of that. You don't think about whether Eddie will be alive tonight. You stop thinking about that kind of thing around day 10. The platoon halts. Lieutenant Howie moves back along the line, crouching beside each man, checking. When he reaches you, he puts a hand on your shoulder. His eyes are steady. There's a hedgerow at the end of this lane. 1 MG nest, possibly 2, dug into the far embankment. We go through the gap on the left flank. Riflemen suppress. Bar team goes through first. The bar, the Browning automatic rifle, is carried by Corporal Jimmy Watts. A square-shouldered man from Tennessee who has been fighting since before you were trained. He nods once. That's the whole conversation. What Lieutenant Howie doesn't say, what he doesn't need to say, is that going through the gap means crossing 25 yards of open ground. The length of a tennis court. Under direct fire from a machine gun with a cyclic rate of 1,200 rounds per minute. That is 20 rounds per second. 25 yards takes a running man about 4 seconds. You do the math. Then you stop doing the math. At 0510, the sky begins its gray pre-dawn shift. You can see the outline of the hedgerow ahead, a black mass against slightly less black sky. A German flare goes up 2 fields over, hanging in the air for 30 seconds, painting the mist in pale green light. Everyone freezes. The flare fades. No movement from the German side. They haven't seen you yet. Now is the moment. Before the light fully comes. Before their visibility improves. Before the dawn itself works against you. Lieutenant Howie raises his hand. Makes a fist. Everyone stops breathing. He opens his fist, fingers spread, and points forward. Jimmy Watts locks eyes with you once. He has a look you've come to recognize in men who've been in this long enough. It isn't bravery exactly. It isn't calmness. It's something quieter than both. Something that has already made its peace with the next 30 seconds without knowing how they end. He steps out of the lane. The hedgerow explodes. The MG-42 opens up before Jimmy is 2 steps into the open. The sound is not like anything from training. It is a ripping, mechanical tearing like someone destroying fabric, except the fabric is the air directly in front of your face and the threads are made of steel. Dirt erupts from the embankment to your left. A man behind you goes down. You don't look. Your sergeant is screaming one word. Go. You go. Your legs move before your mind gives the order. Out of the lane. Into the open. The gray morning light is just enough to see the gap in the hedgerow ahead. A dark mouth cut into that massive wall of earth, barely 4 feet wide. You fix your eyes on it. Only on it. Nothing else exists. The MG-42 swings right. Rounds tear up the ground 8 feet to your left. Little dirt fountains in a perfect line, walking toward you with mechanical precision. You cut right. The gun adjusts. You cut left. The burst misses by a yard and you feel the air move against your leg like a hot finger dragged slowly across skin. Jimmy Watts has reached the gap. He turns and fires the bar back across the field. 1 burst, 2 hammering the nest, screaming something you can't hear over the noise. You hit the embankment at a full run, shoulders first, and squeeze through. You are through. You are on the other side. For half a second you think you've made it. Then you see what's waiting. 3 German soldiers. 5 feet away. As surprised as you are. Everything happens in the space of 1 breath. The first man's rifle is still rising. You don't let it get there. Your M1 fires twice and he folds. The second soldier lunges and you feel the impact of his body against yours before you hear anything, and then you are on the ground and his hands are on your throat and the world is tilting and tunneling and you get your knee up and push and roll and your rifle is gone somewhere and the knife is in your hand and then it's over. You are standing. Your hands are shaking so badly that the knife falls into the wet grass. More men pour through the gap behind you. Sergeant Mitchell grabs your arm and looks at your face. You hit. You check yourself. Shaking. Chest heaving. But nothing is wet except sweat and morning dew. No. Then move. This is the rhythm of the bocage. This is what it has been, every single day for 5 weeks. You clear 1 field. You bleed for 1 hedgerow. You step over the men who don't make it through the gap, you advance 20 yards, and there is another hedgerow in front of you exactly like the last one. Waiting. Defended. Patient. Of the 182 men who started in your company on D-Day, 61 are still here. The others are dead, wounded, or gone. But there is no stopping. Sergeant Mitchell checks the map, laminated, smudged with mud and a brown thumbprint that might be anything. The village of Martinville is 4 hedgerow lines ahead. Beyond that, the outskirts of St. Lo. Lieutenant Howie moves up and down the line, keeping his men oriented, keeping the advance alive. Hedgerow. Gap. Fire. Cross. Clear. Casualties. Hedgerow. At 0630, Private Eddie Bowen is hit. You don't see it happen. You hear it, a short cry that stops too fast, and when you turn he is sitting against the base of a hedgerow with his hand pressed against the left side of his chest. There is red between his fingers. The photograph of his sister Ruth is still tucked in his helmet liner, and he is looking at you with an expression that is mostly just surprise. Doc Daniels reaches him in 20 seconds flat. Works fast. Tears fabric. presses bandages, then looks up at you, over his shoulder just once. His expression tells you everything. "Eddie," you say. Just his name. That's all. He nods. Slow. He's trying to say something. You lean in close. "Tell Ruth." He doesn't finish. You close his eyes with your left hand. You pick up your M1 from the wet grass. Sergeant Mitchell doesn't say a word. He doesn't need to. You both move forward. By 0800, the platoon reaches the outskirts of Martinville. Burning buildings. Rubble in the road. The smell of cordite and char and something chemical that bites the back of your throat. A soldier from 3rd Battalion waves from a bombed-out farmhouse window. Cut off for 2 days, half mad with exhaustion, hasn't eaten since the 9th. You've linked up. But there is no celebration. Because in the same moment, a runner arrives from the rear, breathing hard, eyes wide, and hands a folded message directly to Lieutenant Howie. Howie reads it. His face doesn't change. It never changes. He folds the paper. Looks at his men one last time. "St. Lo," he says. "We push tonight." He turns and leads the way up the road. The push to St. Lo begins at 1800 hours, July 11, 1944. Your column moves along the Martinville Ridge Road, narrow, exposed, with perfect sight lines for every German observer positioned on the high ground to the north. Everyone knows this. There is no better route. You move anyway. The first mortar round falls at 1823. It lands 12 yards ahead of the lead squad, a black eruption of earth and smoke, the shockwave pressing against your chest like a flat hand. Before the dirt even settles, the second round falls closer. And then the third. The Germans have pre-registered this road. Every 20 meters already measured, assigned a firing solution, dialed into their mortars days ago. They were waiting for exactly this movement at exactly this time. The rounds walk up and down the road in methodical sequence, 20 seconds between each impact. The discipline of it is almost worse than random fire. There is no gap to run through, no interval to exploit. Just patience. Systematic patience in the form of falling steel. You press your face into the base of a hedgerow. Wet Norman earth against your cheek. Old roots. Cold stone. You can feel every concussion in your ribs and your back teeth deep behind your eyes. 3 men in your platoon are down inside the first 2 minutes. Then the barrage stops. In the silence, the sudden, ringing, impossible silence, you hear Lieutenant Howie's voice. Not a shout. Not a scream. "Come. Carrying. On your feet. We're moving." He is already standing. Already walking north, toward St. Lo, toward the gun smoke, toward whatever is waiting at the end of this road. He doesn't look back to see if anyone follows. You get up. Everyone gets up. This is the moment you will remember for the rest of your life, and your life may end in the next 10 minutes, which somehow makes the memory feel more real, not less. A man walking calmly up a road that is trying to kill him. Because the alternative is standing still. And standing still means St. Lo never falls. And if St. Lo never falls, the breakout never comes. And if the breakout never comes, more men die in more hedgerows in more fields, on more mornings exactly like this one. So you walk. At 1841, a single shot cracks from a ruined farmhouse on the right side of the road. Lieutenant Thomas Howie is hit once. He goes down without a sound. Not dramatically. Not the way you've seen in the training films. He just diminishes. The way a man does when the thing keeping him upright is suddenly gone. He lands in the road dust and he doesn't move. Doc Daniels is there in seconds. He drops to his knees. His hands move fast. Then they go still. For a moment no one moves. Not from fear. By this point in the bocage fighting, fear has been compressed into something smaller, something that lives behind your sternum like a hot stone. You don't move because Thomas Howie was the center of gravity for every man in this platoon. And for one raw human second the platoon has to feel what it weighs without him. Then Sergeant Mitchell says quietly, "Keep moving." And you do. Because that is what Howie would have said. Because that is exactly what he was already saying when he died. On the morning of July 18, 1944, St. Lo is taken. Major Thomas Howie, promoted posthumously, never got to see it. But Major General Charles Gerhardt made sure he entered it anyway. On Gerhardt's orders, the body of Major Thomas Howe was carried to the front of the column, draped in an American flag, placed on the hood of a Jeep, and driven into St. Lo as the first American to officially enter the city he had given everything to reach. The citizens came out of the rubble. 4 years under German occupation. Their city bombed to near total destruction. They had lost nearly everything. And they stood in the ruins of their own streets, and they watched an American soldier, wrapped in his flag, come home into a city he had died to free. His photograph appeared in Time and Life magazines. The American press called him the Major of St. Lo. He was 30 years old. He was a school principal from Staunton, Virginia, before the war. He never wanted to be famous. He just wanted his men to keep moving. In the campaign for St. Lo, June 6 through July 18, 1944, the 29th Infantry Division suffered over 3,500 combat casualties. The American First Army lost approximately 11,000 men in the Hedgerow fighting before the city finally fell. Every meter of French farmland, every gap in every wall, every sunken lane and every gray Norman morning, paid for. Private Eddie Bowen, the boy with the photograph of his sister Ruth, represents the dozens of young men from the 116th Regiment whose letters and after-action reports still survive in the National Archives. He is all of them. Every single one of them. The Hedgerow problem was eventually solved by an American sergeant named Curtis Cullen of the 2nd Armored Division, who welded steel prongs, cut from German beach obstacles, onto the front of Sherman tanks, allowing them to punch directly through the earthen walls instead of exposing themselves at the gaps. General Bradley approved the device on July 14, 1944. Within weeks, over 500 Allied tanks had been fitted with them. It changed the Bocage War overnight. The breakout, Operation Cobra, began on July 25, 1944. St. Lo was the door. The Hedgerow fighters were the ones who opened it. These fields exist today. Quiet, green, peaceful in the Norman summer. And in some of them, if you know where to look, you can still find old foxholes, rusted shell casings, and the faint outlines of positions that young Americans, most of them teenagers who had never left home before, fought through one hedgerow at a time, one morning at a time, without ever knowing for certain if any of it was working. It worked. These men were real. This happened. They deserve to be remembered. If this story moved you, if you think Major Howe and Eddie Bowen and the men of the 29th Division deserve to have someone say their names, subscribe. Every video on this channel is a debt being repaid, one story at a time. They kept moving. So do we.